The silence in the garage was more deafening than the screaming engines on the front straight. It was early 2026, and inside the pit box of one of the most scrutinized teams in the MotoGP paddock, the air was thick with a tension that felt almost physical. Toprak Razgatlıoğlu, the man who had spent a career defying the laws of physics on a superbike, sat on his stool, staring at a telemetry screen that refused to make sense. Outside, the world saw a superstar. Inside, there was a rider fighting a machine that seemed to actively loathe his very existence. Every time Toprak attempted his signature move, the violent late-breaking entry that had made him a global icon, the bike didn't just protest, it recoiled. The Michelin front tire, the most delicate and temperamental component in all of motorsports, was folding. For the king of late braking, the throne was beginning to feel like a cage. Rumors began to circulate through the paddock like a slow-acting poison. Critics whispered that the transition was too much, that the superbike style was a relic of a different era, and that Toprak's instinct for the front end was fundamentally incompatible with the 2026 prototype regulations. He wasn't just losing time, he was losing the one thing a rider cannot survive without: his identity. Yet as the sun began to set over the first testing sessions, something shifted behind those closed garage doors. No one inside the paddock expected what would unfold next, and it would change everything for him, his team, and the entire 2026 season. To understand why Toprak was struggling, you have to understand the legend of the Stoppy King. Born into a world of stunt riding and raw mechanical feel, Toprak Razgatlıoğlu didn't learn to ride like a traditional racer. He learned to manipulate gravity. His career progression was a vertical climb, fueled by a personality that was as humble off the track as it was predatory on it. In the World Superbike paddock, he was a force of nature. He didn't just pass rivals, he embarrassed them under braking, often entering corners on the front wheel alone. But MotoGP is a different beast entirely. In the prototype world, the 2026 machines are masterpieces of aerodependence and electronic sophistication. They require a surgical touch, a flow that rewards momentum over brute force. Toprak's previous successes had become his biggest handicap. He was trying to use a sledgehammer to perform heart surgery. While his rivals were gliding through the apex, Toprak was wrestling with a front end that felt like ice. The political pressure from the team management was mounting. They had invested millions into this transition, and the early data suggested they had bought a Ferrari but were trying to drive it like a rally car. He wasn't just fighting his rivals. He was fighting the expectations that had been placed on his shoulders since his very first race. But behind that calm expression, the pressure was building fast, leading to a confrontation that no one saw coming. The antagonist of this story isn't a person, it's a carcass of rubber and a specific chemical compound. The 2026 Michelin front tire is a technical marvel, but it operates within a window thinner than a razor blade. If the temperature drops by a few degrees, you lose grip. If the pressure spikes because you're following another rider too closely, the bike becomes unrideable. For Toprak, the Michelin tire was a wall. His aggressive V-shaped cornering style meant he was putting massive instantaneous loads onto the front tire. In his previous life, the tires could handle the abuse. Here, the Michelin would simply tuck, leading to a series of high-speed incidents that left the team's carbon fiber budget in tatters. Insiders claimed that some mechanics were beginning to lose faith. They saw a rider who refused to change his DNA and a bike that refused to compromise. The technical debates in the debriefs grew heated. Engineers demanded he soften his inputs. Toprak insisted he couldn't feel the limit unless he was pushing against it. The rift was widening. Some believed the experiment was already over before the first lights had even gone out. However, the twist that followed would change the championship narrative entirely. As the tour moved toward the Circuito de Jerez, the internal tension reached a boiling point. The garage was divided. On one side, the data-driven engineers argued that Toprak must adapt to the bike's geometry. On the other, a small group of loyalists believed the bike had to be rebuilt around Toprak's unique skeletal structure. Weight distribution became a battleground. To give Toprak the feel he craved, they needed to move the center of gravity in a way that contradicted every simulation they had run. It was a gamble that risked ruining the bike's aerodynamic balance. The team principal was faced with a choice: force the rider to conform or let the rider lead the way into the unknown. Away from the cameras, a private meeting took place. It wasn't about telemetry or lap times, it was about trust. Toprak made it clear he didn't want a safe bike, he wanted a weapon. He needed the bike to stop like a wall, even if it meant sacrificing stability in the fast sweepers. The decision was made to overhaul the bike's geometry for the Jerez test, a hybrid setup that defied standard MotoGP logic, but what the paddock discovered next shocked everyone. When Toprak rolled out onto the Jerez asphalt on day one, the atmosphere in the pit lane was skeptical. But as he crossed the line for his first flying lap, the sound of the engine told a different story. He wasn't hesitant anymore. The overcorrection movements that had plagued his early sessions were gone. The bike looked settled, planted, and most importantly angry. He was braking 5, 10, 15 meters later than he had just weeks prior. The telemetry showed that the new weight distribution was applying pressure to the Michelin front tire in a more progressive, linear fashion. He wasn't hitting the tire with a hammer anymore, he was leaning on it with the weight of a mountain. The lap times began to tumble. Red sectors flashed across the timing screens, but it wasn't just the speed, it was the body language. Toprak looked comfortable. He was playing with the bike again, sliding the rear into the dry sack corner with the confidence of a man who knew exactly where the limit was. The crew chief stared at the monitor, a slow smile spreading across his face. The Michelin wall hadn't just been climbed, it had been demolished, yet this was only the beginning of a far bigger storm. While the focus was on Toprak's riding, whispers began spreading about a change from the supplier itself. Reports from deep within the paddock suggested that Michelin had quietly introduced a slightly revised tire construction for the 2026 season. This wasn't a revolutionary change, but for a rider like Toprak it was everything. The new construction reportedly offered more deflection feedback, a way for the rider to feel the tire squirming before it actually gave way. In the high-stakes world of MotoGP, that extra millisecond of communication between the rubber and the brain is the difference between a podium and a trip to the medical center. Some believed Michelin had adjusted their philosophy to accommodate the more aggressive aero packages of 2026, unintentionally handing Toprak the keys to the kingdom. Whether it was a stroke of luck or a calculated technical evolution, the result was the same. The barrier between the rider's instinct and the bike's potential had vanished. The paddock was now on high alert. If Toprak had found a way to bridge the gap between his superbike aggression and MotoGP precision, the hierarchy of the sport was about to be flipped upside down. But what happened after that left even his closest team members stunned. The final day of testing wasn't about glory laps, it was about the long run. In MotoGP, being fast for one lap is a talent, being fast for 25 laps is a championship. Toprak went out for a full race simulation under the blistering Spanish sun. Usually this was where he struggled. As the tires degraded, his aggressive braking would usually overheat the front, leading to a catastrophic drop in performance. But not this time. The data revealed a staggering level of consistency. He was hitting his marks with a mature precision that some rivals described as terrifying. In the neighboring garages, the faces of the championship favorites told the story. Marquez and Pedro Acosta were seen huddled with their engineers, looking at Toprak's sector times. The threat was no longer theoretical. The outsider had mastered the most difficult aspect of the sport. According to insiders, the feedback from Toprak was chillingly simple. The bike is mine now. He was no longer a student, he had become the teacher. Yet the real test was still to come, and the twist that followed would change the championship narrative entirely. As the trucks packed up to leave Jerez, the narrative of the 2026 season had been rewritten. Toprak Razgatlioglu was no longer the superbike guy trying to fit in. He had become the primary disruptor in a field of prototypes. The transformation was total. He had taken the burden of expectation and turned it into a weapon of psychological warfare. He didn't just learn MotoGP, he forced the technical giants of the sport to meet him halfway. The hybrid style, a blend of wild stunt-derived aggression and calculated technical efficiency, had created a new blueprint for how a 2026 bike should be ridden. The rumors of his decline were replaced by a singular, haunting question for the rest of the grid. How do you stop a man who can outbrake you by 10 meters and still keep his tires alive? The 2026 season was no longer just about the established legends. It was about the arrival of a predator who had finally tamed the beast. The message from Jerez was sent, and it was heard in every corner of the paddock. The hunt hasn't just begun, the predator is already at the door.